This one is about the people that I want to help. And I promise you, this book is, it's different. You know, it's a lot of incredible self-help books out. I love them. I got a whole shelf full of them. This is lived experience of wisdom that shows up in a way that's led to, and I'll tell you, like, my life is dope. I live a really super dope life. And that's not to brag, but it is to say that my life started with the intentions I set. So everything that I live now, like if you ever in LA, you come to my home, I have my journals from prison that get so detailed about the life I want to live. And I promise you, I have lived literally everything that I wrote down, including Oprah. And the Oprah thing, I'll give you this really quick beat. I wrote this book in solitary, asked anybody if they wanted to read it. And the guy wrote hollered back down the hall, he said, "Don't nobody want to read that shit, this ain't Oprah." I was like, damn. I was like trying to heal. I'm like, I'm gonna have to take care of this guy. But because we was in solitary and I couldn't get to him, it forced me to be like, okay, well, what do I do? And I literally wrote down that if I'm going to take writing serious, I need to define what I want to happen to my writing. And so I wrote down, I want to be a New York Times bestselling author, and I want to write something that's good enough for Oprah to read. Oprah done read 3 of my books and interviewed me 3 times about all 3 of them. You know, you can be having the most incredible week, you can accomplish everything on your to-do list, and then you can miss the mark one time, and then you'll pounce on yourself. Yeah. And so what I realized is that growing up in an environment where abuse was normalized and trauma was familiar, that I began to adopt this mindset that my life didn't have any value. And so the power for me was in discovering my true, authentic self and getting back to that. And it started with an essential question. I was in solitary confinement, and I was struck by this question. How did I go from a kid who had dreams of being a doctor and an artist to serving out my most promising years in prison? And what that did is it led me on this journey to begin journaling. Now, I know you get a lot of people who write self-help books, and they're like, yeah, just write it down. I'm gonna challenge you in this book in ways that you may not have been challenged before, and I'm gonna push you in ways that you may not have been pushed before, because what I believe is that journaling has to be an active thing. And so the way that I defined the embarkment on this journey of freedom was my write or die moment. And what I knew is that if I didn't write, I was definitely going to die in prison. And if I didn't get to the truth of who I was before all the damage, all the trauma, all the negative narratives, that I would, without a doubt, live out the rest of my life behind those physical bars. And so when I sat down to write and journal, I started with this. You can only put ink on paper at that moment in which you're willing to be completely honest. And that means that you're gonna have to be honest about the pain, you're gonna have to be honest about the responsibility, but you also have to be honest about the joy and the success. And that process of writing it down, the authenticity was the active part. But the real power came when I went back and read those words. I mean, I would be angry in solitary. I write about it in the book where one time I was so angry with my neighbor, he owed me a couple of dollars for some cigarettes that I was smuggling in the cell block. And he asked for another one on credit, and I refused to give it to him. And so he blew the power out of the cell. I'm sitting over there listening to the little jazz, and I said, yo, he blew my power out? I had to deal with this guy, but I couldn't get to him. And so I literally started to write down everything I wanted to do to him and how angry I was. And I waited a couple of days when I was calm, and I went back and read those words. And it was devastating, because I thought that I was the cool kid, I was the nice kid that just happened to end up in prison. There was not a world where you would have told me that I was mean, angry, or violent. And even the violent acts that I committed, they always were, in my mind, I was defending myself, I was standing up for myself. And when I went back and read those words, I realized I had been lying to myself. I had concocted this idea of myself that was not even remotely close to the truth. And that is how I began to heal, because I was able to accept responsibility, but also reassign responsibility when it was appropriate. When when I was a kid, we lived on this block on the east side of Detroit, beautiful manicured lawns. You know, it's really a model for Black working class America, middle class America. And on that block, we had what I define as like superheroes. You know, my dad was in the Air Force, another friend's father was in the Marines, there was a sister down the street who was a police officer. She went on to become city councilor. Her name is Alberta Tinsley. I know y'all know Alberta. And then there were these two men who were like martial artists. One of them, he was incredible. I mean, he had trophies that was taller than me as a kid. And then there was this other one that would tell us all these stories about, you know, him being a martial artist. And this guy would host movie night and movie days at his home. And basically he would charge kids 50 cents. And what he did is he built this rapport with our parents to where they began to trust him. And he began to do sleepovers. And at one of those sleepovers, he attempted to molest me. And in retaliation for that, I burglarized his house. And my intention was to destroy this man's home, take all of his property. But we ended up getting caught. And I was taken, you know, to the precinct and then brought home to my parents. And there were two things that was really shameful about the experience. One is that I carried the burden of this adult's decision. Yeah. And I internalized that as if there's something wrong with me. Because what he said in response to me saying, hey, what are you trying to do, is all the things that, you know, predators do, right? They vilify the person that they either victimize or they're trying to victimize. And then there was that moment of walking out of the house with the officers and seeing my neighbors and them gasping because I'm the good kid. I'm the kid that doesn't do anything wrong. But where it turned into anger at is that my parents punished me without inquiry. And they jumped to that I was acting out as opposed to like, how does this kid that doesn't get in trouble?
It's an anomaly.
And right, you know what I mean, ends up in this scenario. And so I carried that for many, many years. Yeah. And it wasn't until 3 years ago when I was 50 years old, and I just was like, I really wanted to understand my parents, because you know, when you go through growing up in an abusive environment with abusive parents, like you take all that on. And I saw that with my siblings. And so I was like, you know, I started thinking about how old my parents were when they had me. And like that was the first moment I really started to have like empathy and compassion. I'm a dad. I got a 13-year-old kid that I had when I was 40. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. They had me when they was, you know, 22, 23. And so what started as that inquiry became these powerful, powerful conversations with my parents. And it was one of the hardest conversations I've ever had with my dad, was sharing that moment and watching him break apart as a father, because he felt like he didn't do his job to protect, you know, his family. But what it did is it opened up something so powerful with my mother and I. Because in that vulnerability of me being willing to share, she just opened the floodgates about her life. And this woman that I had judged, this woman who I had anger toward for being physically violent with us as kids, this woman who I had forgiven with conditions, I realized that this was a wounded little girl. You know, my mother was molested when she was a kid. She was raped when she was a teenager. Like, she had her first child when she was 16. There was no way possible that she was capable of being a mother that can nurture children when she hadn't received that. And that was like the power of being vulnerable and opening up and having those authentic conversations. And it's one of the things in the book, and you know, the beauty of this book is that there are these tough narratives, but they're written with love. They're written with the intention of liberating those who have found themselves struggling with things. And what you'll arrive at on the other side of this is magical.
Yeah.